By way of opening remarks, I want to deal briefly with the question of authority and obedience. And there's an English mathematician and philosopher by the name of William Kingdon Clifford who made this insightful observation. He said, "There's one thing in the world more wicked than the desire to command, and that is the will to obey." What we've seen with the crisis of the past 8-9 months, which was precipitated by the COVID-19 pandemic, was precisely this phenomenon. The willingness to obey on the one side, contrasted with the desire to command. And various observations can be made from these two facts. The one most striking of all, I think, is that the two seem to feed upon each other. The greater the compliance, the craven desire or willingness to obey, the more strident becomes the voice of authority. And this, I think, can almost be expressed as an axiom. It is, unfortunately, I think, also a truism and an accurate commentary on human nature. If the person who is being bullied does not fight back, does not put up any resistance, then the bullying will continue and will intensify. And what we've seen, in fact, over the past several months is an increase in political bullying. We've seen it in South Africa, which is perhaps not entirely surprising, but what is disturbing is that we've seen it in leading countries of democracy such as the United States, the United Kingdom, countries in Europe, Australia in particular, and in particular the state of Victoria, which I think is perhaps one of the worst examples of authoritarian dictatorship which has been precipitated by the crisis. On the other hand, we also have the opportunists who've taken advantage of the situation in order to increase their influence and their ability to dictate their will. In particular, in this regard, I'm thinking of one Klaus Schwab, who is the organizer of the Davos Mutual Congratulation Fest that occurs in January or February of every year. He has spoken frequently about what he refers to as the Great Reset. Now, the thing that one finds that all of the people who speak about the Great Reset have in common is that there are similar characteristics in their vision of what lies ahead. The one is inevitably, I suppose, a desire to dictate a new dispensation in regard to the climate crisis. In this regard, one of the other proponents of the Great Reset, none other than Prince Charles, has repeatedly said that this is an opportunity for us as a world to undertake this important reset in respect of the climate crisis, as he calls it. Klaus Schwab has a slightly different emphasis. His emphasis is more upon the economic and the consequent ideal, in his mind, of equality, of worldwide equality. And this, he recognizes, can only be brought about as a result of some form of world authority. Now, the first question that would naturally occur to one is, by what authority does he speak? Whoever elected him to speak on behalf of what he perceives to be the future of the world? Whoever authorized him to speak in such strident terms? Well, the answer is he authorized himself. It seems to me, from a bit of research that I've done, that he initiated the idea of the World Economic Forum, and from that has grown a hidden authority. And that hidden authority is now beginning to make these ever more strident demands. In this connection, I saw recently an article. In fact, it was a video involving precisely these issues, And one of the visuals that was made available was a visual of a poster, a Soviet-style poster, which contained these words: "You will own nothing and you will be happy." I think those words require some reflection. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Well, the happiness sounds like a very benign and benevolent concept. But in order to get there, in order to achieve this nirvana, one will have to give up one's ownership. One will have to give up the idea of personal ownership. And of course, inevitably, one will have to give up the idea of personal and individual liberty, because liberty and the right to property go hand in hand. So, in fact, what we have here is a Soviet-style command. I don't know upon whose authority that poster was put up. The video didn't deal with that. It simply showed it as part of the visual on an analysis of what lies in the future in regard to this crisis, which is now being exploited for ulterior purposes. But what is quite obvious is that it is a consequence of the philosophy of the one world, which is a philosophy which is at least 100 years old, and which included such notables as Bertrand Russell. Now, you will recall that Bertrand Russell was probably, almost certainly regarded as the foremost English philosopher of the last century. What he had in mind was that the world should devolve into a single world state where everybody would be equal. But of course, as the communist experiment has already demonstrated, what we know from experience, from observation, if not experience, is that this utopian ideal of a one world of equality, an egalitarian one world, inevitably goes hand in hand with totalitarianism, and that inevitably gives rise to a total loss of liberty, of every conceivable liberty. Bertrand Russell was undeterred by any of this. In fact, he was one of the English academics and intellectuals who really regarded the Soviet system with some admiration. Among others, there was George Bernard Shaw, who had a similar attitude in this regard. This is what Bertrand Russell proposed. He said that what is required is that as this new system, this brave new world is set up, we will need to do a division of the world into different localities, not nations, but localities, which is based upon convenience and usefulness and utility and so on. And those localities will then be audited for population and for their requirements. And this audit will then be placed on record, and it will form the ground rules of future behavior in regard to each of the localities and the individuals living within those localities. The food of the world, said Russell, would then be distributed by a central authority, well, no surprises there, and the central authority would distribute the food according to the population and the population intensity of each of these locations at the time when the audit was done. Then said Russell that if any of these localities should exceed the assigned population growth rate for the various localities over a given period of time, they would not receive more food on that account. They would receive the allocation which they were justly entitled to. And therefore, they would find themselves short of food. Well, it wasn't necessary for Russell to spell out the consequence of that iniquitous philosophy. What Russell had in mind was that each locality would be starved into submission, or at least that starvation was a perfectly legitimate device. So we find the phenomenon of authoritarian dictatorship in every conceivable intellectual pursuit. And there's no doubt that Marx was an intellectual of sorts. There's no doubt that various individuals, such as Russell and George Bernard Shaw, were clearly intellectual, but that didn't save them from falling into this dreadful Marxist authoritarian trap. Now, if anybody should think that this dystopian vision that I've sketched is too bad to be true, then just consider the situation in South Africa. Interestingly enough, Ramaphosa and the ANC have been perfectly candid about their program, about what they have in mind. They haven't hidden, for instance, the ideal for them of expropriation without compensation. They haven't hidden in any way at all. In fact, it's been reaffirmed from time to time, the demand for a national democratic revolution, all of which is Marxist language. All of this is, in fact, written into their policies, and they repeat these policies from time to time. What is surprising is that people do not take these things more seriously, and especially people in the media. The media should take seriously what the ANC seriously intends. But unfortunately, we find that this doesn't happen. So the ANC operates according to the principle of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Well, we know, of course, that Ramaphosa said that this is a process whereby the frog is boiled incrementally. Of course, the stage is reached when the frog expires. And that's the opportunity that the ANC is waiting for the expiration of the boiling frog. And when that happens, their policies will be fully implemented. And nobody will be able to say, we didn't know, because we did. We knew because we were told. We didn't have to speculate about the prospect of expropriation without compensation or about the national democratic revolution. All of it was written down. It was part of the policy. So therefore, it is important that people such as those around this group this morning should do whatever they can and should influence as many people as possible into the understanding of just how sinister the outcome of all of this will be. Because the outcome will most surely be a total loss of liberty, a total loss of property rights, and we will be, in the language of the poster, we will own nothing and we will be happy. We will be happy according to diktat. The problem with the democracy that we have is that those who can read don't count, and those who can't read don't care. So inevitably the ANC finds itself on a path of victory no matter what its conduct, which is why, notwithstanding all the corruption and notwithstanding all the base, unconscionable conduct of the various leaders of the ANC, they continue in power and are likely to continue in power for a while yet. I don't say inevitably, and certainly not indefinitely, but it is likely that they will continue to achieve victories as they did the other day, although that was cast as not such a great victory, but they certainly managed to achieve success in a number of wards. So a word of warning. What we need to do is to warn ourselves about the seriousness of the situation and about its imminence. Because when the frog expires, the ANC will do what it has said it will do. Thank you.
Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666.